Welcome back to the Smugsy Show. I'm Smugsy, your host. Every Wednesday we meet here to talk about important things and important people. This week it's Ivanka Trump, former President Donald Trump's favorite daughter, and why she secretly supports Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine. The latest polling out of Moscow, and more big little lies about affordable housing in Maine. But first, the Smugsy Show is presented to you by Subsidies, sleek and elegant joint ciggies made with organic cannabis rolled in all-natural, locally sourced paper. Look for Subsidies in the pretty indigo and marigold packs. Well, it's great to be back. Last week's show was hacked, we believe, by the Russian fuzzy bears. But the show must go on, and here we are. First, to talk about Ivanka Trump. Did you know her name really isn't Ivanka? It's Ivana Marie. Donald Trump's favorite daughter. Well, she spent the day yesterday, 8 hours in the hot seat in front of the January 6th Special Select Committee investigating the insurrection in Washington. Yeah, you can imagine how fun that was. She was called to testify because her father, former Donald Trump, thought it was a good idea to first try to convince Vice President Pence to not certify the Electoral College results, and also give an incendiary speech to a group of thugs that had arrived at the Capitol with weapons, telling them to fight, 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 and repeating that the election was stolen. And then we know what happened. There was an attempted coup. At least 5 people were killed, hundreds injured, and we almost lost the United States of America, longest standing democracy on earth. But thankfully, we didn't. And Ivanka now is discussing what happened that day on January 6th, because it turns out that, 6 hours worth of phone calls are not available in the records. So this is Ivanka Trump. She used to, up until 2018, she was a Democrat. But here she was. And so why do our sources say that she secretly supports the war in Ukraine, Vladimir Putin's war, invasion of Ukraine? Well, it's because finally there's a father who's worse than Donald Trump. Yeah, did you know that Vladimir Putin apparently has 2 daughters? He was married to an airline stewardess, perhaps, for about 30 years. They divorced in 2013, but they have 2 daughters. Interesting names: Katerina Vladimirovna Tikhonova and Marie Vladimirova Voronasova. So, middle name Vladimirovna. I think that has something to do with Vladimir Putin. So those 2 have been sanctioned. In case you haven't heard, of course you haven't heard, because who heard of them? Vladimir Putin keeps his family completely secret, although he is quoted in today's paper as saying he enjoys communicating with his grandkids. Apparently he has grandkids. Can you imagine what communicating with Vladimir Putin is like, at the end of a really long table? That must be a lot of fun, nice grandpa Vladimir Putin. But despite, the fact that he's leashed this horrible war on the country of Ukraine and has committed what appears to be war crimes, and not only is really committing genocide to a certain extent in Ukraine, but also thousands of Russian soldiers have died, like 7,000. But he's telling the Russian people, because he has complete control over the media, he's just feeding them the propaganda that the Russian army is doing a great job liberating the Russian-speaking Ukrainians. So the latest polling out of Moscow, now you'd think, it's kind of odd that they would, practically World War III, and there's Russia isolated from the rest of the world, economic sanctions like there's never been before, and the army is fallen a little short. They thought they were going to take over Kyiv, and it hasn't happened. Well, nonetheless, there's been some polling, and surprise, surprise, President Vladimir Putin's approval rating rose to 83% at the end of March. Can you believe it? Not only that, but according to this polling, 81% of Russians believe they back the military campaign. So, wow. Goes to show you. I mean, I guess there's always two points of view, but also I think this is worth noting because I think it ties into these high polling numbers and this favorability rating, is that Vladimir Putin issued a new law. He passed a new law himself. He's in and of himself passed a law prohibiting referrals to the military campaign in Ukraine as a war or an invasion. If you're in Russia and you refer to what's happening in Ukraine as a war, or why does that always happen, or an invasion, you go to jail, and also makes it illegal to dissent. So, geez, I wonder if that had anything to do with the high polling numbers and the high favorability about the war, given that if you say anything against it, you have to go to jail. But polling, I mean, we saw it here in the United States, right? The polls that said Joe Biden was going to crush Donald Trump in a landslide didn't exactly pan out. So take those polls with a grain of salt, if you know what I mean. But in Russia, the problem is the state-sponsored propaganda, right? That's the problem, is that this entire narrative about what's happening in Ukraine is being rewritten in a way that portrays Russia as a liberator, and the people of Russia are being deprived the real facts about what's going on the ground. They're perhaps unaware that their own troops are committing these heinous crimes because they don't have enough food or fuel, and that the army generals are being killed in record numbers, and that the plans are bad, and they're not winning. In fact, they're losing. The Russians aren't getting that story because of state-sponsored propaganda. In the United States, we don't necessarily have state-sponsored propaganda, but what we have instead is corporate-sponsored propaganda, and then we have these media companies that are part of the corporate propaganda machine. And so instead of big lies like we're going to go to war in Ukraine and pretend that we're liberating, we have lies about like affordable housing. For instance, in the newspaper, if you follow the main newspapers, there's a columnist. She goes by the Main Millennial. That's her stage name, but her real name is Victoria Hugo Vidal. And she, a little bit of a whiner, good writing style, not much life experience, and just sort of a forlorn, I would think loser's not the right word, but she's a little bit gullible. And anyway, she writes a column, and she's been complaining that she doesn't own a house, and every opportunity takes a pot shot at the town of Cape Elizabeth, where I happen to know a lot of really good people. And so this columnist, this millennial, who's been whining about the fact that she has all this student debt because she followed her dreams and went to grad school to get a degree that someone told her would enable long-term economic security, but lo and behold, she's $69,000 in student debt, which I might add, if she got federal loans, have been in deferment since COVID, so she hasn't been paying any interest, or no interest has been accruing, so there's that. But anyway, she has this debt, this degree that hasn't allowed her to yet purchase a home. She saved $20,000 living with her mother, and found out that she's qualified for a $140,000 mortgage, so she has $160,000 available for the purchase of a home. And she wants to buy one within 30 miles of Portland that takes a dog and is 2 bedrooms. Well, I mean, a girl can dream, right? And in her complaints about the fact that there's not enough supply to meet the demand, and that if only capitalism was working, there'd be like a target for her to go in and pick out a house. She says, like, you know, she doesn't have any sympathy to Cape Elizabeth residents who torpedoed that proposed affordable housing development. Come on, guys. So we're back to this ghost affordable housing project that was pitched in the town of Cape Elizabeth, Maine. And it was a favorite for real estate developers because, you know, they take out these publicly backed mortgages that are then bundled and securitized. And if you have mortgages in prime real estate, well, the bond ratings are great. So it's a completely publicly financed project that would generate millions of dollars in profit and do a lot of churning on Wall Street with tax credits and you name it. It's just a layer cake of subsidy, and it's a big ATM because these low-income housing projects, they focus exclusively on low-income apartments and restrict the housing to low-income apartments, because then the government transfer checks to these low-income tenants. It just goes immediately into the bank accounts of the developers. So they not only build this crappy housing that's only affordable for 30 years, but they make a ton of money, and not only in the real estate, but in the rent. So in Cape Elizabeth, this project that she says the taxpayers there torpedoed, actually what they did was just put it out to referendum. And here's the thing. The cost of the project that was going to result in the net gain of 23 one-bedroom units, that's the speak of corporations, okay, not homes, but units, like widgets. So there was going to be a net gain of 23 one-bedroom apartments, and it was going to cost $13.5 million plus a 30-year TIF plus tax credits, et cetera, et cetera. But just focusing on the $13.5 million of cost for a net gain of 23 one-bedroom units, that works out to about $585,000 each. That's what the taxpayers of Cape Elizabeth are being asked to pay to finance a one-bedroom low-income apartment for 30 years. And this writer, who can't afford a house, is mad at the taxpayers of Cape Elizabeth. And my message is, you've got the story wrong. Like, when you own a house, will not want to pay for that kind of deal. In fact, I would prefer we could buy her a house in Cape Elizabeth. And wouldn't that be better for her? Wouldn't that be a better use of taxpayer money to actually invest in people like this, owning their own home instead of renting? So then you think, well, why is this person who has this graduate degree so misinformed? Why does she keep assuming that what happened in Cape Elizabeth was to her detriment, when in fact we're doing it for her? And Miss Maine Millennial, I might just add my 2 cents about what you should do if you live with your mother and she owns her own real estate in Buxton. And I know that she's approaching the age where she needs to make some renovations if she's going to stay there for a long time. Now would be the perfect time for you to invest your savings and mortgage in, and your knowledge of the planning board rules in your town to create an accessory dwelling unit, or perhaps subdivide the home and create a multi-family home for you and your mother, and that way you could have home ownership. She could have a improved property without, I think, any adverse tax consequences. So, there's not, the answer always is not just more government subsidy, if you know what I mean. Sometimes you got to put your thinking cap on and stop paying attention to the nonsense that the paper keeps generating. For instance, the editorial recently penned by Tony Payne from the Portland Chamber, he and the advocacy person from Maine Equal Justice, well, they too, they circulated nonsense. They said that the Cape Elizabeth we bullied a developer with a good reputation. First of all, the developer in Cape Elizabeth was a corporation, a non-resident corporation that didn't own any property, didn't own the property in question, doesn't pay any taxes. It's a corporation, it's not a person. There was no personal guarantee, there was no personal obligation of anyone. No one's personal name was anywhere on this deal. Not a single cent of anyone's personal money was on the line. This was all going to end up just being publicly funded. And at the end of 30 years, the developer would have a multi-million-dollar piece of real estate on the town square in one of Maine's most affluent towns, debt-free, no deed restrictions, and that's why these low-income housing projects are ATMs for developers. That's why the main media shouldn't allow the consultants and the lobbyists for these people present information in the newspaper that is false. The statements made by Tony Payne and the Maine Equal Justice author, Deb Ibonawa, is false, where they say last year in Cape Elizabeth, that kind of vocal minority was able to hijack the municipal process and bully a well-respected developer of affordable housing, blah, 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 from building a 49-unit development at the heart of Cape's Village where kids could walk to school and older residents could grocery shop. Aww. The thing is that the whole project was pitched as a 49 one-bedroom units, okay? So how many kids do you think are going to be living in a building with 49 one-bedroom units, and why should a town that has nothing but fresh air and good schools pay $13.5 million for a crappy 23 one-bedroom extra net gain? So state propaganda, corporate propaganda, the bottom line is you got to use good sense. You got to write your own narrative, but you got to use good sense, common sense, and that's what you're going to find here on the Smugsy Show. And that's it for this week. Until next time, this is Smugsy signing off. Take care.